Okay, thanks very much for going along. Apologies in advance that we weren't able to do this much earlier, but travel just to explain what they were. George and Gayatri left Scotland today at 12 o'clock, and this was the earliest really in fact we could do this, so apologies in advance. So I am going to give an indication about the nature of the legal case that is arising from George and Gayatri's ordeal over the weekend at the hands of the police at Gatwick Airport, and then each of them will be happy to speak to you and give an indication of where they're at following what happened on Saturday morning through into the afternoon. So we act on behalf of George and Gayatri, both of whom were detained on the 27th of September for approximately 4 to 5 hours, respectively. They were returning on a flight from Dubai when they were confronted by armed police officers, citing Schedule 3 of the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act 2019, and they cited that as the basis for the detention. Now, as a preliminary, I think it's important to record that neither George or Gayatri were formally arrested as such. Rather, they were detained for the purposes of what was called an examination. During the course of their ordeal, they were subjected to a frightening interrogation procedure, and that was conducted by armed police officers who proceeded to ask them questions which at times ranged from the sublime to the outright ridiculous, including queries about China, Gaza, and Russia. On any analysis of such questioning, there was nothing picked up which could remotely be described as evidence of any form of hostile activity. And hostile activity is the key word underpinning detentions under Schedule 3 of this draconian legislation. And we can state with some confidence that none of the questions posed had anything whatsoever to do with terrorism. The operation of Schedule 3 on the index legislation is both draconian and oppressive, and it's aimed at subversives who present as risks to the state. Given the facts of this case, as I've unfolded to date, it's clear that this was a contrived, politically motivated investigation, and it was undertaken with the aim of humiliating, undermining, and ultimately embarrassing each of my clients. It served to cause much distress and anxiety, not only for them but also their family and close friends and colleagues. To compound their trauma, although police will probably say otherwise, they didn't in fact have access to a lawyer of their choosing. And this is very important because of the serious implications arising in the event that any person detained under these provisions refuses to answer questions. And if that course was taken, no matter how seemingly banal or otherwise irrelevant, it would have devastating consequences. While the right to silence is technically preserved here in the anomalous outworkings of Schedule 3, it serves in many ways to effectively erode that inalienable right to silence. Unlike other mainstream policing investigations, where silence alone can never be used of itself to ground a criminal prosecution, if you say nothing in a Schedule 3 examination, you run the real risk that your silence will be used disproportionately to prosecute even with the flimsiest of other evidence. Such barely credible corroborating evidence could be something as simple as travel to Moscow. You stay silent at your peril under Schedule 3. It makes it all the more concerning then that when you look at the failure of the interviewers to inform George and his wife had in fact been detained as well, given his belief that she was seeking access to legal advice for him. After consultation with each of my clients today, I have little doubt that had Mr. and Mrs. Galloway declined to answer questions, they would have run the serious risk of being subjected to the most egregiously contrived prosecutions under Schedule 3. In that event, not only would they have lost the right to travel freely, but they would have run the risk of being deprived of their liberty. Notwithstanding all of this, they were deprived of legal advice. Each of them still answered questions put to them throughout the entire detention. The entire operation went well beyond the scope of police powers under Schedule 3, as it was plainly no lawful basis to detain nor by any stretch of the imagination could there have been deemed to be any reasonable suspicion of engagement in so-called politically hostile activities. This was a barely concealed ruse to get their phones and their IT equipment. Our client's most immediate legal remedy is a challenge both to the decision to implement their detention and the ongoing investigation against them. As part of the case, we will be seeking access to all records and authorisations relating to the detention and indeed the precise legal basis upon which they were deprived of their liberty. Equally, we demand the immediate return of their mobile phone and laptops, all of which contain highly sensitive communications relating to their work and engagement with many agencies, including indeed the British government itself. Today, we're issuing pre-action protocol correspondence against the relevant agencies engaged in the operation, which was overseen by Counter-Terrorism Policing South East. It remains unclear who exactly was ultimately responsible for overall decision making, but that will emerge shortly in the course of this legal action. On the technicals, we are citing breaches of Articles 5, 8, 10 and 11 of the European Convention of Human Rights in relation to our respective clients' rights to liberty and security, respect for their private life and family life, together with freedom of expression and association. Given the status of one of the interviewers identifying himself as connected to the security service, there is a wider discrete issue pointing to the likely involvement of the intelligence agencies. On the basis of this suspicion, we are considering filing an application to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal in order to assess the extent to which MI5, MI6, or indeed any other intelligence agency had a hand in this investigation. Standing back and looking holistically on what transpired on Saturday, together with our awareness of recent spying revelations and journalists in this jurisdiction, we cannot discount the real possibility that Mr. and Mrs. Galloway equally have been the subject of directed surveillance by state intelligence agencies. Both Mr. and Mrs. Galloway were the victims of a cynical, intelligence-led and politically motivated operation of Orwellian proportions. It was specifically designed to access their private data and communications as some form of phishing exercise. More generally, it was initiated to undermine their integrity and credibility by seeking to demonise and marginalise them. However, history has shown that whenever the heavy hand of the state weighs down on its citizens, that only serves to galvanise victims into even greater resolve to challenge and agitate against injustice. As evidence of that, we need look no further than the recent exposing of industrial-scale spying operations on journalists and indeed lawyers in this jurisdiction over the recent number of years. We're confident the brave stance taken by George and Gayatri Galloway in legally challenging the abuse of power perpetrated on them at the weekend will equally reap an important dividend. In their case, it's the hard-fought right and liberty to hold and promote independent political views and thoughts. Saturday's state machinations amounted to the most egregious attempt to erode freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Our client's pending legal battle starts today, and it transcends both their own case and also it ought to put a marker down against the oppressiveness of the operation of Schedule 3. Today's legal action has to serve as a precedent to rail against the legislation being used as a sledgehammer to silence any form of political dissent. Detaining George Galloway in a bid to try and silence him because robustly expressed political views which are in many ways uncomfortable to those in authority will simply fail. If nothing else, it'll only serve to redouble its efforts. He fully expects that those who planned Saturday's actions ought to rue the day that they did so. Thank you very much. I'll just hand over now to George to respond.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to this press conference. At least at first, I want you to separate me from this issue because I'm well aware that my views are a minority taste. I don't pretend to speak for the majority, though I insist that I speak for a sizable minority on British state policy towards many things, but in this case, international issues. I want to separate it because in this press release is the use of the word Orwellian. This was an Orwellian experience. I invite you and all citizens to contemplate the meaning of the phrase, "You are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave." You have no right to silence. If you refuse to answer any and all of our questions, you will automatically be committing an offence under the Act, the Terrorism Act, albeit Schedule 3 of it. I've been around the block, but I never expected such words to be addressed to me. The doublespeak in the phrase, "You are not under arrest, you are not free to leave," is one that chills or ought to chill the blood, and it could happen to any of you. I am nowadays a broadcaster with a very significant audience. I was abroad before returning to London, Gatwick, as a broadcaster, speaking on media matters, in particular the looming presence of AI in the lives of broadcasting and journalism. This could happen to any of you. You could be told, "You're not under arrest, but you are not free to leave," and that you have a legal obligation to answer any and all questions. And in the context, Mr. Winter mentioned some of them in this jurisdiction, but across the United Kingdom as a whole, we now are poised to enter into an enormous battle over the question of digital ID, where almost 3 million people in less than 48 hours have signed a petition in opposition to this. It's going to be the hottest of political potatoes. It's going to be a poll tax moment for the government, in my opinion. With the spying on journalists, spying on lawyers, repeated arrests at British airports of British journalists like former Ambassador Craig Murray, Richard Medhurst, Kit Clarenberg, and others. This is all a sign, an indication of a vortex into which our country has fallen, in which freedom of speech, freedom of expression is increasingly threatened, impelled, actually, such that even Donald Trump, of all people, felt able to cite it in the presence of the King himself during the recent state visit. Vice President J.D. Vance has been at loggerheads now for 8 months with British laws which impinge upon the freedom of expression and speech of American-owned tech companies like X and Google and so on. We really are heading into a dark place in this country. Not to mention almost 1,000 arrests made, primarily of old age pensioners, sometimes of octogenarians, in 2 cases of people in their 90s, blind people, disabled people, members of the clergy being arrested under the terrorism laws for holding a cardboard placard at protests in England and elsewhere. The latest one being this morning outside the Labour conference in Liverpool. But I feel that in what they did to us, they pushed the envelope further than they have ever done before. It's one thing detaining, arresting journalists, but in my case, as a 7 times elected British Member of Parliament who sat through the passage of the Terrorism Act and opposed it line by line, not knowing that one day it would be used against me, it seemed to me like a crossing of a Rubicon. I'm the leader of a British political party with hundreds of thousands of votes. I was last elected to the British Parliament only last year. Who knows, I might be elected again. Suitable by-election arises. I'm not an unknown person. They must have known, whoever designed this, that this was going to become a very big issue indeed, and it has. And not just here. The Chinese Foreign Ministry have just in the last few hours expressed their concern about it, and it has excited comment from Rio de Janeiro to everywhere else around the world. I'm receiving requests for interviews from literally all over the world. And they must have known that that would happen, or they're too stupid to be in the security services. So, to the event itself, I can confidently say, having been robustly interviewed by journalists all of my life almost, this was no interview. None of the questions was specific in any way. I fully expected to be asked about something I'd done. I was not. I expected to be asked about something I'd said. I was not. Something I'd written. I was not. No specific question at all was asked of me, beyond generic musings that I now believe were merely a pretext for, as Mr. Winters said, the seizing of our devices to go on a fishing expedition for morsels, the delectation of the government, or feeding to the media, or for potential prosecution on non-security, non-terrorist issues. The use of such a terrifying procedure to obtain access to material that they would never otherwise be able to obtain, because of course it sought a warrant to require our computers. The judge would have asked, what's the basis of your request for a warrant? And they would not have been able to give one. They had any evidence that my wife or I had ever committed any criminal offense. They would have questioned us ordinarily and normally about that. But the beauty of this schedule in this act at a port for them was that they had no need to show cause. They had no need to give a reason why they were seizing our material. And that's a lacune in British law that I certainly had underestimated. It stopped them at a port under this legislation, and that cannot possibly be just, cannot possibly be morally correct, and we intend to prove it cannot possibly comply with our commitments under the European Convention of Human Rights. I do need to stress even aware that my wife was also being detained. I'll come to that in a minute. But I was not asked a single question about anything I had ever done, said, written, or otherwise expressed. And I formed the view, I mean, the police have said today in their response, we were briefly detained. We were not charged, and we were allowed to proceed on our way. Well, it depends what you mean by briefly. 4 and 5 hours didn't feel at all brief. And of course, we were allowed to go on our way, minus any means of communicating with anyone. Lawyers, family members, followers, friends, no one. We arrived from the airport to London for the long train journey to Scotland in a black hole. Nobody knew where we had been all that day. Nobody knew why I had not turned up for the speech I was to give in London, in central London, ironically in the presence of the Chinese ambassador. He thought I'd stood him up, and I had no means of communicating to the organizers of the speech, the event, the meeting, and therefore they were left to imagine I had disappeared into some kind of black hole, as were our children, as was my 90-year-old mother. Nobody knew where we were. If we had disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle. Now, we are meeting this robustly. If they imagined that this would intimidate us into silence or pulling our punches, then, as I say, they're too stupid to be in the security services. But we, for the sake of liberty in this country, are determined to pursue this all the way to the end. The only last thing I'd say, Kevin, and it's quite a significant thing, I said to the police officer, you have behaved dishonorably in this regard. The police were otherwise, apart from this, perfectly polite and courteous to me. But in this regard, by omission, they dishonorably and disadvantageously from our point of view, did not tell me that my wife was in the very next room being held under the same clause of the same act. Why was this important? Because I immediately asked them to inform my solicitor. They claimed that they could not get hold of my solicitor. They offered me a solicitor of their choosing. I declined on the basis that my wife was now outside of the airport contacting my solicitor directly. Little did I know that she and her devices were in the next room and being held. Now, I don't mean to sound in any way patronizing. You can imagine that I have got under the skin of successive British administrations. You can imagine that I am not liked in the security services. But what has my wife ever done? She's not even British. What has she ever done to be detained for 1 hour longer than me? Myself 4 hours, her 5 hours. What has she ever done, ever said, that could in any way, reasonably, and the law must not be arbitrary, it must not be deployed on the basis of protected characteristics. Other than being my wife, what has she ever done to be held by armed officers in an airport for 5 hours? And it's taken a toll on me, but it's taken a much bigger toll on her, as she may or may not be prepared to testify. So we're going all the way with this. Sorry, I said that was the last thing. This is the last thing. I have been flying in and out of this country virtually all of my life, in a long life in politics. I've been to Iraq, I've been to Gaza, I've been to Palestine, I've been to Iran, I've been to North Korea, I've been to Russia, I've been to China. I have never been pulled out at the airport and asked a single question. On the contrary, I'm greeted particularly warmly and courteously by the border force on virtually every occasion. I have never been questioned, ever, before. What changed? Why this time? I'm speculating, but I'm sure that my speculation is accurate. What's changed is the British Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, a former student of mine. I can't claim the most gifted of my students, but she is now the Home Secretary. And she is determined, as people like her often are, to show that she is tougher on dissidents like me, her former teacher, than her predecessor, Yvette Cooper. And so I hold Shabana Mahmood responsible for what happened to us until proven otherwise.
George, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Gayatri if she feels okay about it, just to talk about her experience in Saudi. I think it's important that this isn't a publicly and that everyone can hear something of what you went through and how you feel both at the time and how you feel now since.
Thank you, Mr. Winters. Ladies and gentlemen, I have not slept nor eaten since the ordeal that we went through on Saturday morning at Gatwick Airport. For me to be held and thrown into that black hole by armed police in a catch-22 situation under the Terrorism Act for hostile activity. As my husband said, what have I done? What hostile activity can I have done? I have 3 British children. Why would I want to act out any hostility towards the country in which my children live and grow up? I have 3 British children and I want them to live in a good and fair country. So naturally, I do not have any intention and any need to act hostile towards the country. The question is, no. The interrogations, it went from the sublime to the surreal. They wanted to know why I was born in the Netherlands. They wanted to know every university I went to, noting down, asking me to spell out the universities. All the way down to my opinion on Palestine-Israel. Asking me about my fingernail, asking me to explain about it. And I said, there's no need to. This is my position. I stand with Palestine, like all the others, the millions in this country, millions more around the world, who are in this country are being rented up, basically, 1,000 a month for showing their support. And I had to verify that these were my opinion, mine only. And not only since 13 years ago, but forever. It's not that my husband has influenced me. These are my opinions, and these are the actual whole grounds we are together. So I have, they tried to put me in the corner along with all those that arrested, the 90-year-olds, those in wheelchairs that are making their voice heard but are not allowed to. They asked me why They asked me whether this country has become less free or less democratic. And I put it to them that they themselves have made it clear. When I moved to Britain 13 years ago, I would not have been arrested for misgendering someone or for holding a placard supporting a certain campaign group. Whereas now, 13 years later, I'm not 25,000 a month are. So, as I said, I have not slept, not eaten. I can't stop thinking about what happened. I cannot stop thinking about my family and my close friends now having to read online because I have, of course, been unable to contact them, that I was held, detained under the Terrorism Act. Can you imagine how that feels under the Terrorism Act? So, as I reiterate, as a mother of 3 British children, I am not hostile to this country. I am only the best. And as I said to the officers in their room, I'm sad. I feel incredibly sad that this is the way Britain is going to.
Okay, Gayatri, thank you very much. That was really for you. It's much appreciated. I'll just leave it with you if anybody has any questions and I want to raise or any issues arising from what's been stated here this afternoon.
Gayatri, I know you touched on it there, how you're feeling, but how are you both feeling and what are you hoping to achieve with this legal action?
Well, if she's sad, I'm angry. I'm kind of famously angry quite a lot of the time. But I've never been more angry. And I repeated multiple times during the interrogation that I considered an outrage that someone like me, at 71 years old, I mean, the policeman took his jacket off so I could look at his gun, sitting 4 feet from me with his gun. I could scarcely believe that it was happening. Only a year ago, I was a member of Parliament. I was elected to Parliament 7 times across 5 decades, from the 1980s until last year. If I can be treated like that, anybody is vulnerable. Journalists, broadcasters, political activists, people with political views that don't suit the government of the day. And that's not the Britain I want my children to grow up in. And so legal action is to try and halt this steady torrent of actions, laws, and decisions that imperil the very basis of British freedom. My grandfather, God rest his soul, was an Irishman and therefore no need to, an Irish Republican and a communist. But he was first in the recruiting line to join the British Army, Foreign Army, in 1939. Thomas O'Reilly, God rest his soul, because as he put it to me throughout the rest of his life, fighting fascism was more important than being an Irish. Was an incumbent duty on all. That's why he put on the uniform of a country that was not his and that he considered actually to be oppressing his. But fighting fascism came first. And I honestly believe we're on the road to fascism if we don't stop it. It will be a particularly British form of fascism, maybe wrapped up in Anglican clothes, although all of the clergy that have been arrested in recent months were Anglican clergy. So perhaps not even that. to stop this slide, or we'll end up in a situation where you're not free. You're not any more free than I am. And that's the intention of the legal action.
Mr. Galloway, it's from a local perspective here, and you've probably alluded to this already. Have you chosen to be represented with our lawyer here, given our background in these kind of cases, and what happened with Joyce's classroom?
This law firm was already my law firm and has acted for me in several other matters, and I have such confidence in them. And you can see why, looking around the wall, you can see why KRW Law is the perfect firm and perfect fit for this case. And we're not just ready to go, we are already underway.
Sure. That's your question. Normally people are arrested. You see it, dramas, TV shows. Suspect will say they don't want to talk, say no comment. But what you're saying on this text you've created, yeah, that no comment can bring you to court.
Automatic conviction, you told me. Automatic conviction. I didn't know such a thing existed. If I had said no comment, that would have been an offence under the Act and with automatic conviction. Now, I'm remiss, I'll be honest with you, having sat through in Parliament and opposing and voting against this legislation, I was seriously underestimating how frightening and damaging it is. I repeat myself, you are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave. The Hotel California doesn't come near it. You're not under arrest, but you are not free to leave. You have no right of silence. And any failure to answer any or all of our questions is itself an offence under the Terrorism Act. How frightening is that? I mean, I appeal to the public. Imagine that was you.
And if I could just clarify a bit about what George has stated, referencing my opening comments, silence of itself cannot convict you per se. What we're saying here is that there is a difference in exercising your right to silence under Schedule 3 of this legislation compared to exercising your right to silence under generic, substantive, other general policing investigations. Specifically, the evidential bar that needs to be cited here by the authorities is dangerously low when allied to silence could seriously jeopardise your liberty. That's the point. And our assessment is that you exercise your right to remain silent at your peril. To do so could seriously compromise you. And what each of my clients did here was the appropriate course. They did so without access to legal advice. And that is a very, very significant driving force in this action. And the machinations that were deployed to contrive if they didn't have legal advice is something which was seriously concerning. As George has highlighted in his earlier comments, he was misled into thinking that his wife wasn't in the police station, and that informed his decision making on access to legal advice.
If I may say, Kevin knows the law. The officers plainly didn't, because the words I used to you were the words they used to me. If you do not comply and answer any or all of our questions, that in itself is an offence. You have no right to silence. They repeated that several times. And that's why I talked, because my instinct would have been yours, that I'm sitting here without a lawyer, armed police officers. They're asking me questions which don't seem to make any sense or seem to lead anywhere. My best outcome, my best option is to say no comment. But they specifically warned me that any such recourse would automatically, they used the word, automatically be an offence under the Act. So you know the law better than that.
Mr. Galloway, can I just ask, whenever you're in that room, what is going through your head at the time? And just now, I suppose in the immediate future, what's next for you, what's next for your wife and the rest of your family?
Well, my first task is to get my wife to eat. She's not exaggerating. She has not eaten since Saturday. And to try to get her to sleep. My next, second priority is to press forward with these actions, which we have instructed KRW law to take, because I believe that this is all located in a bigger picture. The bigger picture being the digital ID, the arrests of people for saying they support a civil disobedience organization, which I suppose needs to remain nameless, the assault against liberty and freedom in Britain has ratcheted up a notch with what happened to us on Saturday. And it's my job to try and bring together people who like me or hate me. At least let's agree that there will be no future, no decent future for any of us if we allow this slide to continue. Eventually, all of our freedoms will be taken away from us. So what's going through my mind? It's odd that my wife used the phrase catch-22. There's a lot of people now of your age have not read Catch-22, but it's the greatest novel of the 20th century. And just nobody has ever written anything like it since. This is a catch-22. I'm not arrested. I'm not free to leave. I have no right to silence. I must, on pain of conviction, answer any or all questions. To me, it was nightmarish. Now, I'm not a soft person. My wife is a soft person. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, but inside me I knew this was a very significant thing that was happening. That had never happened to me before, and I assume has never happened to any British parliamentarian before. I can't imagine. Somebody pointed out, only 2 people in the whole history of this land have been elected in more constituencies. Me and Winston Churchill. And one of us is in a police station with armed police in this Kafkaesque nightmare. And I repeatedly said to them, this is an outrage. What does this have to do with terrorism, national security? What do my views on Xi Jinping have to do with terrorism or national security? Britain has full diplomatic relations with China. Every company in Britain is either doing business with China or would like to be doing business with China. How could it be germane to an interrogation under the Terrorism Act what I think about the president of China, whom I've never even met? Kafkaesque, nightmarish. That was what kept going through my mind. And although they now describe it as briefly detained, trust me, 4 hours of questioning by 2 police officers doesn't feel like brief in anybody's timescale.